Greetings from India. I am Deepak, your host for today's podcast episode. We are honored to welcome Dr. Tima Bansal, Professor of Sustainability and Strategy at the Ivey Business School, Western University, as our distinguished guest for today's episode. Professor Tima Bansal is a leading scholar in sustainability and strategy, recognized globally for advancing how businesses can thrive within planetary and societal boundaries. She holds the Tier 1 Canada Research Chair in Business Sustainability. Dr. Tima is also a Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada and of the Academy of Management, reflecting her exceptional contribution to management research and thought leadership. As the founder and lab leader of Innovation North, Professor Bansal is pioneering new ways of thinking about innovation, helping organizations design strategies that build more resilient, prosperous, and sustainable futures. She also founded the Network for Business Sustainability and Ivy Center for Building Sustainable Value, both globally recognized platforms connecting research and business practices. She currently serves as the chair of the board for the United Nations Principles for Responsible Management Education and as chair of the Impact Committee for venture capital firm Shift for Good, where she guides investment towards systematic sustainable impact. Her research explores the intersections of time, space, and scale in business systems, shaping how organizations approach long-term value creation. She has published extensively in the Academy of Management Journal, Harvard Business Review, Organization Science, and the Strategic Management Journal, among others. Her ideas reach global audiences through her regular column on Forbes.com and her 2025 Clarendon Lectures at the University of Oxford. Dr. Bansal's scholarly excellence has been recognized through numerous awards, including the Helmut Prize for Western University and the Distinguished Scholar Award by the Academy of Management's Organizations and Natural Environment Division. She was the first Canadian honored by the Espin Institute as the Faculty Pioneer for Academic Leadership. Most recently, she was honored with the Palmer House Prize from Heriot-Watt University for research that explored the relationship between long-term thinking and radical innovation. With honorary doctorates from the Universities of Hamburg, Montreal, and VU Amsterdam, and affiliations with the University of Cambridge, Oxford, and Monash University, Dr. Bansal's influence extends across continents. Her work continues to inspire business leaders, policymakers, and academics to reimagine the role of business in building a sustainable world. Today, Dr. Tima Bansal joins us to discuss her groundbreaking research, Seeing Beyond the Here and Now, how corporate purpose combats corporate myopia. Let's not keep you waiting. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Tima Bansal to the podcast. Dr. Bansal, we deeply appreciate your gracious acceptance of our invitation. It's an honor and privilege to host you today.
Thank you, Deepak. It's an honor to be here today.
Thank you. Dr. Bansal, your paper starts with a fascinating tension. Precisely when companies face a crisis like a pandemic or climate shock, they need to see the bigger picture the most. Yet, your research shows that threat actually forces them to look inward and become short-sighted. Can you walk us through why our biological or organizational wirings forces this myopia? Just we can at least afford it.
That's a great question, Deepak. I think the premise of it is relatively simple in that uncertainty creates myopia. So whenever we feel under threat or not sure what's going to happen in the future, we look inward. And so rather than me going through a whole bunch of reasons why that happens, let me just give you two reasons. One is behavioral. So it's a threat rigidity response. And so you know that when you're facing a threat, people tend to actually focus on themselves. And so the high uncertainty narrows their attention, and so that they process less information and they look for answers nearby. And you know this in your own life probably. Very specifically, I remember 9/11. This is the Twin Towers crashing in New York. And I was teaching on that day, and when I had heard that the Twin Towers, the first tower, had fallen, had been attacked, the first thing I did was actually go into my office and just close the door. I didn't want to talk to anybody, and I knew that I wasn't under threat. I work at a university in Canada, but there's something about uncertainty and threats that cause people to tighten up, to stop looking outwards and start looking inwards. And so I think that when we're scared, there's a flight or fight response, but all of it is focused right on the moment. And as a result, we don't look outwards for more information. We don't look elsewhere. And so high uncertainty causes a threat rigidity response. That's a behavioral response. The second reason is a temporal focus, that when we feel high uncertainty, we also tend to be much more short term in orientation. And so when, if you're given, let's say, an opportunity to get a reward 10 years from now, under a higher reward 10 years from now, uh, or a lower reward now, but there's high uncertainty for the higher reward 10 years from now, you will almost certainly pick the lower reward, or sorry, the short-term reward. And that's because when we look longer into the future and there's higher uncertainty, we discount the future. And we see this. We see this in financial markets all the time. And so when there's an investment to be made, you will expect higher returns and higher uncertainty. And so higher uncertainty means that higher discount rates, that means that we end up shortening our time horizon. So the first example would tend to be more egocentric, and the second example would tend to be more short term. And those are two very specific examples. Now, the interesting question is, why am I talking about uncertainty? I think today we are facing more uncertainty than ever before. In the paper, we make the argument that the uncertainty is arising because of the complexity of our environment. And so now we have people that are more connected than they ever were before, whether it's through digital technologies, whether it's through transportation. We also find that supply chains are more connected than ever before. Every object that's probably on your desk, and especially this computer, has a supply chain that's global. And so when you see higher connectedness through digital technologies or communications, when you see it through people and products moving around the world, this connectedness means that when there's a change in one part of the world, it affects another part of the world. And that causes more turbulence. And that's why we're seeing crisis after crisis after crisis, because we're more connected. So the argument that I'm making is that high uncertainty ends up making us more egocentric. High uncertainty keeps the temporal focus short term, and we're facing more uncertainty than ever before. So we're more myopic than ever before.
Professor, you argue that corporate purpose isn't just a slogan, but a cognitive tool that exposes new insights. Practically speaking, how does having a strong purpose change the data a manager look at? Does it actually make them see market signals that a profit-first competitor would be blind to?
Yeah, so corporate purpose then is basically the reason for being in firms, the raison d'etre, as the French might say. And so it's a broader ambition of the company. It's usually just a pithy statement. For example, IKEA's corporate purpose is to create a better everyday life for the many people. Unilever, to make sustainable living commonplace. Microsoft, to empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. Those are really broad statements, right? They don't have the specificity about what you do tomorrow. They have this broad ambition about what the company's purpose is beyond profits. And I'd like to say the purpose for Ivey is to inspire leaders, my business school. My business school's purpose is to inspire leaders for a sustainable and prosperous world. That doesn't tell me what I do tomorrow. That tells me what I need to do in general is always to put students first so that they are creating a better world, more sustainably and more prosperous, so creating wealth. So you asked me, does strong purpose help a manager? Absolutely. And when they make trade-offs. And so they are intended to inspire people that when they have to choose profit or purpose or something bigger than profit, that they recognize that there's something bigger than profit. So it does make a big difference. There is a study that showed that firms that, over a 10-year period, firms that had purpose performed 400% better than firms without purpose. So purpose does make a difference, and purpose does help profits in the end.
Professor, we often hear about silos in organizations. Sustainability sits in one office, finance in another. Your paper suggests purpose help managers see issues holistically. Is this because purpose acts as a common language that allows a CFO and a sustainability officer to finally understand each other's trade-offs?
That's a really great question as well. And I think that there's no question that purpose provides a common language. And so in Microsoft, it's empowerment. At Ivey, it's inspiring leaders and sustainability prosperity. So purpose gives us language, but it's much more than that. Purpose helps us make choices. There's trade-offs between whether you invest in innovation, whether you invest in the long term, or you invest in profits. And so I think that when you have a finance person that's saying we need to worry about what markets are saying, that you can have the R&D person that's saying that we need to make investments in innovation. Our purpose helps us ensure that we don't just look at those short-term profits, but also look at those long-term investments.
Professor, the third mechanism you identify is sustaining focus. In the startup world, we call this grit. But in a massive corporation, sustaining focus during a storm is incredibly hard. How does purpose act as an anchor to keep a strategy largely unchanged even when quarterly earnings are taking a hit?
So the purpose is, like I said, long-term, big picture. Okay. Profits are short-term, focus on just money. Now, if you are bleeding financially, bleeding so much that you're not going to survive in the long term, then the purpose means nothing, right? So there's no way that purpose will override short-term bankruptcy. And so I think that I want to be clear that purpose will, companies won't go to bankruptcy courts with just their purpose in mind, right? They are not managing short term. But what we think about with purpose is that it allows us to make those decisions in the short term that will get us there in the long term. And so what we can lose sight of is if we just look short term, we just go from decision to decision to decision, and we lose sight of what we're doing in the long term. When you're training as an athlete, and you're training for an event, let's say a major event, or you're training for a big race, your purpose is to win the race. There's no question, or to win the event. But what you have to do is say, what do I do today? And what do I do tomorrow? What do I do the next day? But you keep in mind that long term. Now, one day you might have a bad day and bad training day, or you might get injured even. But the purpose means that you will ensure that the injury or the bad day are kept in context. So instead of losing sight of the long term, our purpose says keep the long term in mind, but don't lose sight of the short term. I use this analogy when I explain this, that race car drivers, actually, let me go back up. Where do you look when you're driving a car? Do you look far in the distance or do you look close? Most people do both. And what they do is they keep the distance in mind, but they never lose sight of that short term, right? And so you keep going back and forth because if you don't look in the long term, you're going to drive in the wrong direction. But if you don't recognize the short term, the near term, you might hit a deer, you might hit something else, right? So you keep going back and forth. As time gets faster, this goes back to the uncertainty. As time goes faster, where do you look? You end up actually looking shorter because you get more scared, right? And so if you drive faster and faster, then I tend to look closer and closer. Race car drivers, you know what they do? They look further. And so that they can feel the engine as it goes to the short-term pieces, but they recognize as they go faster that they will get to the long-term faster. And so they have to keep that long-term view. And so I am not saying don't look at the short term. I'm saying do both. Keep the long-term purpose in mind, but then also think about what you're doing in the short term.
Professor, you mentioned bringing unity and direction as the final mechanism. In decentralized organizations where teams are autonomous, how does purpose replace the traditional command and control structure? Is purpose effectively doing the job that a middle manager used to do?
No, absolutely not. Purpose is keeping the whole organization together so everybody is walking in the same direction. And so it's not getting rid of jobs. In fact, what it's doing is saying, let's keep our ability to make decisions throughout the organization. And so the CEO keeps the purpose in mind. The frontline worker also keeps the purpose in mind. So if Patagonia's purpose is to save the home planet, then what it does is it tells everybody that they can't, when they have to make a trade-off between two decisions, that saving the home planet is the most important. And so ultimately gets everybody saying, let's do this one thing and do it well. But then also, again, not losing sight of the short term.
Professor, in your broader work with Innovation North, you talk about shifting from inside out thinking. What can we sell? To outside in thinking. What does the world need? How does the model in this paper help an executive make their specific mental switch without feeling like they are abandoning their fiduciary duty?
Before I answer the question, let me just tell you about Innovation North because I think it gives some context. Innovation North is a research practice initiative. Our goal is to work with organizations to tackle complex organizational challenges. And so many organizations, all organizations face complex challenges, right? So whether it's it's you have too many returns coming in, products are being returned because of the internet, whether it's meeting scope 3 emissions for carbon, whether it's employee wellness, all of these are complex challenges. What Innovation North does is say, let's inject systems thinking into helping us understand these problems, because what we tend to do is just look at them as analytical problems that are just profit oriented. So taking a systems lens, we actually inject more innovation so that the answers are both suitable for the organization. So they help the organization build resilience and profits. They're also ends up meeting the systems needs, the larger systems needs, whether it's planetary or community or markets or industry, all of those larger systems in which the organization is embedded. And once you get innovations that align with the organization's needs and the system's needs, you end up with longer term returns. So returns that help to build profits over the long term. And so what does Innovation North talk about in terms of shifting from inside out thinking? So that means that I only care about what I and the organization wants to do, and then I push it up. So I want to I want to fast fashion. I want to have more and more articles of clothing to produce and sell because that will help my revenues. Good short-term plan. Outside in thinking is saying, well, what's good for my clients? What's good for the planet? What's good for my communities? And then let's build a new model. And maybe that model, and this is what Patagonia does, has can't think of the name, it's not worn out wear, but something like this, where they actually repair clothing. And so then they produce higher quality clothing, and now they provide a service to actually improve the clothing so people can send back their garments, have them repaired. This allows Patagonia then to recognize where the clothing is not working, where it's falling apart, and innovate for new clothes. And so then Patagonia has this relationship that they build with the customer. They keep the clothes out of the landfill, and they innovate new products. So the outside in thinking, as you called it, helps to build better products that are better for our community and leads to long-term profits. So there's no trade-off. I think profits and outside in thinking are absolutely aligned.
Professor, you recently written about strategies ecological fallacy, the idea that we ignore the planetary boundaries we operate within. Does this paper suggest that corporate purpose is the missing link that allows traditional strategy to finally account for biological and social limits?
So once again, let me start with explaining what the ecological fallacy is, because it's easy to make the mistake to think that ecological means the natural environment. It doesn't. The ecological fallacy is a statistical fallacy. So that means that what we do statistically is apply macro level assumptions to every individual. Okay. And then we also have a tendency to apply individual assumptions to the macro level. So the ecological fallacy says, let's take all of those individual courses that we teach, let's say finance, operations, strategy, or even better yet, let's take all the individuals in a team. If every individual is doing well, we think that the organization is doing well. But that's not always the case. Sometimes you can still have every individual trying to perform well in an organization, and they will compete in such a way that's actually going to destroy the organization. That's the ecological fallacy. So the individual outcomes don't necessarily mean that the outcomes for the organization also work. And going back to my example, that if we have operations, marketing, strategy, um, management science, accounting, all of these courses that we teach, they don't all mean, sorry, not teach, but even in organizations, they don't all mean that the organization is going to do well. If you have the marketing person trying to sell as much as they can, if you have the operations person trying to build as much efficiency as they can, we can end up with an organization that does a lot of this. That's the ecological fallacy. And then what we do is to say, if the organization is doing well, then every individual is doing well, the atomistic fallacy. That in itself is also a problem, because the atomistic fallacy, it suggests that just because the performance of the organization is doing well doesn't mean that all of those profits are going to be distributed to every individual. In fact, the profits could go elsewhere, to the shareholders, to the owners. And so the ecological and atomistic fallacies are ones where we go across two different levels of analysis and say what's good for the individual is good for the organization, what's good for the organization is good for the individual. That's wrong. And so your question is the missing link in traditional strategies, the ecological fallacy? Absolutely. And I think that when we think about Adam Smith or Milton Friedman or even Schumpeter, we were thinking about, they were making the argument that what's good for the individual, the invisible hand, will end up being good for the world. Whereas that might have applied sort of back then. Certainly, we know that individuals that work hard in an organization don't necessarily mean that's going to be good for the world, because there's people elsewhere that grab the profits and don't make it good for the individuals. Does that make sense?
Yes. Professor, many companies claim to have a purpose, yet they still panic and cut R&D the moment a recession hits. Based on your research, what is the litmus test that distinguishes a purpose that truly combats myopia from a purpose that is just a marketing tagline?
So a good purpose is one that reflects what the company is doing, while at the same time looks at something that's longer term and inspiring for the organization. So I gave you some purposes at the beginning of this podcast, but the one that I really like the best is Microsoft. To empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. So they don't say, oh, we build software or we build hardware. What we do is we empower people, so we give them the tools. That allows them to pivot into almost any type of learning platform. And so they could go into learning generally. And they also say every person. So by every person, they mean accessibility. So whether you're blind or you have a certain identity, they want to make equal access for all. I think Microsoft's purpose is long-term, it's ambitious, it's inspiring, and it's relevant to the industry that they're in.
Professor, a key theme in your career is the concept of time. How we perceive short-term versus long-term value. Did your research for this paper reveal that purpose-driven organizations actually experience time differently? Do they plan in 10-year horizons while their competitors plan in 3-month sprints?
Again, that's a really good question. And I think that increasingly, as I said at the outset, organizations are becoming more short-term. And there's evidence to show this. There's a wonderful paper by Sampson and She that showed that over the last 30 years, discount rates have dropped. Sorry, discount rates have increased. Discount rates have increased. And that means that firms are becoming more and more short term because they discount the future. And it was most evident during the financial crisis in 2007-8 and during the dot-com bubble in 1999, 2000. And so what you see is high uncertainty, higher discount rates, more short-termism. So under greater uncertainty, we're seeing much more short-termism. And what a purpose does is extend the time frame. Then drawing out then the other point that I made is that organizations that have a purpose, they're actually able to do both. So they do the 3-month sprint, as you said, but they also have a destination in mind. I don't know if destination is the right word, but they keep their North Star in mind, and that's their purpose. And so for Ivey, our purpose is to develop leaders for sustainability and prosperity. But at the same time, I still have to go into the classroom and teach. So I don't lose sight of having to get students educated, but I also know why I'm educating them. That keeps us moving all in the same direction.
Professor Bansal, I would like to conclude this episode with one last question. If a CEO is listening to this episode and realize their organization is suffering from crisis myopia, constantly putting out fires and ignoring the horizon, what is the very first step they should take tomorrow morning to operationalize the findings of this paper?
So that's a really good question again. I think that there is no question that organizations are feeling like they're facing increasing pressures. And so what do you do tomorrow morning as a CEO? I would dig out the purpose statement and I would remind people, not just in the meetings that I'm in, but electronically to all employees, and ask them, how are you executing on your purpose? I'm going to give you an example. Novo Nordisk's purpose, this is a pharmaceutical company in Denmark. Their purpose is driving change to defeat diabetes and other serious chronic diseases. A CEO in Mads Olvesen, and I think he was a CEO about 20 years ago, he found that people lost sight of the purpose because it was about diabetes. And what he asked everybody to do in the organization is to find one person, whether it was one of their family members or friends or someone in a hospital, find one person with diabetes and have a conversation with them. And that moment changed the whole organization because they knew what their purpose was. Eventually, of course, it takes time. Novo Nordisk was the one that came up with the drugs that now are weight loss drugs. They're defeating diabetes. They did not lose sight of their purpose. What does the CEO do tomorrow? The CEO tomorrow will go into the office and ask every one of their employees and colleagues to say, what is our purpose and what are you doing to move our purpose forward?
Thank you, Professor Tima Bansal, for such a rich and thought-provoking conversation. Your insights on how corporate purpose can help leaders see beyond immediate pressures and confront deep systematic crises have added tremendous value to this discussion. It has been a truly privilege to explore your research and its real-world implications for strategy, sustainability, and the future of business. Thank you once again for sharing your time, expertise, and your wisdom with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Deepak. It was really an honor.